Okay, theory of natural law or natural law theory is um, attributed to the medieval philosopher, theologian, and saint, also the angelic doctor of the Roman Catholic Church, Saint Thomas Aquinas. So this guy is a very important figure in Western philosophy. He's also a very important person in Roman Catholic belief. He is in fact a saint and an angelic doctor of the church. Saint Thomas Aquinas, during the 13th century, okay, he um, was an Italian philosopher, theologian, and he belonged to the order of preachers, which is the Dominican order. So he was a Dominican friar. He belonged to that religious congregation. So he was a friar, a priest. As an intellectual, Saint Thomas Aquinas was greatly influenced by the writings of Aristotle. So he was an Aristotelian scholar. He studied and investigated closely the writings of Aristotle. So St. Thomas is famous for Christianizing Aristotle's philosophy. This means that he borrowed the philosophical concepts of Aristotle to explain Christian teachings. Take note, Aristotle was from the ancient times. Okay, so Aristotle lived and existed in the world a couple of centuries, several centuries before Saint Thomas Aquinas. Okay, more than 1,000 years Aristotle existed, 1,000 years before Saint Thomas Aquinas, and Saint Thomas Aquinas here uh, comes into contact with the writings of Aristotle and studies them. And as a Christian philosopher, as a Catholic, he used the ideas of a Greek philosopher. He used those ideas to explain teachings and beliefs in Christianity. Okay, so that's how that is the important contribution of Saint Thomas Aquinas. Okay, so Saint Thomas Aquinas also wrote a couple of works, but the most important, and this is a very voluminous work. Okay, it's published in multi volumes. It's a very long work. It's the Summa Theologiae. So this is the masterpiece of Saint Thomas Aquinas. But actually, he did not finish writing this one. Okay, he stopped writing. He stopped writing philosophy, and then after some time, he died. So he never finished the Summa Theologiae. So in this book, we find the different ideas of Saint Thomas Aquinas, his teachings on Christian doctrines like the Holy Trinity, the existence of angels. Even, do angels exist? Saint Thomas Aquinas provides arguments. Does God exist? He has arguments on that. But all are grounded on reason. So in the Summa Theologiae, Saint Thomas Aquinas never relied solely on Holy Scriptures, on the Bible, to prove, for example, that God exists. He used rational arguments, and that's what makes his work philosophical. Okay, so the treatise on law by Saint Thomas Aquinas is famously taken from a specific part of the Summa Theologiae. And here he discusses things like the essence of law, the different kinds of law, and then the natural law. And the theory of natural law is the foundation of succeeding moral theories on natural law. What is the essence of law? This is a very important definition of law coming from Saint Thomas Aquinas. He says, law is nothing else than an ordinance of reason for the common good, made by him who has care of the community and promulgated. Quote unquote. That's from the Summa. Okay, so let us try to analyze this definition. First, law is an ordinance of reason. Another term for ordinance is it is a command. Okay? A command or a directive. Where does this command come from? It comes from reason itself. For what purpose does reason have this command? It is for the common good, meaning to say, it serves the welfare or the good of all people in a community. That is what the law is for, the common good or the good of all people in a community. Now, who creates this law? It is made or created by him who has care of the community. It is created by someone entrusted with the care of the community. And it is also promulgated, meaning it is enacted. Okay? The law is enforced. That is why we are bound to follow the law, because it is promulgated. That's the basic definition of law, okay, according to St. Thomas Aquinas. Now, he also distinguishes different kinds of laws, and there are four. First, there is eternal law. What is the eternal law? The eternal law is God's divine plan of the universe. Now, the universe is governed by divine providence or divine reason. Divine providence is God himself. Okay, now, God is the one who has care for the community of the entire universe. Okay? He creates this law, the eternal law. It is his kind of a plan, like a blueprint of an architect. This is his plan of the entire universe. So according to this plan, things are directed towards their proper end. The fact that things have purpose means that there was an intelligent being who created things according to a set plan. Okay, that's why the universe follows a certain order. And the different things that exist in the universe follow also a certain order. They are directed towards their ends or purposes. In other words, things exist purposively. Things exist with purpose. Okay? Now, before the universe was created, time did not yet exist, because time and space only existed when God created the universe. So what was then there before the universe existed? Where did God exist before the universe existed? Before and outside the universe, there is eternity. And God exists in eternity. That's why the law that he creates is also eternal. Okay? Eternal meaning it does not have a beginning, it does not have an end. That's why, because God has no beginning and no end, the law he creates is also eternal. Doesn't have a beginning, doesn't have an end. It is therefore unchanging. It does not change. So there is only one eternal law created by God. And it is eternal because he himself is eternal. God is outside time. We human beings, we experience change because we are in time. Okay? But God, because he loved us so much, when he created us, he gave us reason. So we have a rational nature. Through our rational nature, we are able to know this unchangeable truth, the eternal law, and therefore we are able to participate in it. Okay? We participate in God's eternal law in a rational way, meaning to say we are able to have a glimpse of it. We are able to have an understanding of it. Although it is only God and the blessed ones who have a full understanding of the eternal law. But we human beings, our reason is limited. We cannot know it fully. We can only participate in it. Okay? Irrational beings like animals, plants, they don't possess reason. So they don't participate in the natural law in the same way that we do. Because plants, animals, they are things of the universe, and therefore plants and animals also have proper ends according to the eternal law of God. But again, they participate in the eternal law of God differently from the way we participate in God's eternal law. That's the first kind of law, according to St. Thomas, eternal law. This is the unchangeable, eternal, one law that governs all things that exist in the universe. Okay, next is divine law. Okay, this is the law derived from God Himself. It is God who Himself gave this law that leads men, that leads us humans to our supernatural end, which is eternal happiness, our existence in heaven when we are reunited with God. So God Himself provided this divine law for us to follow so that we may attain this end or goal in our lives, which is eternal happiness, which we can experience not in this world but in another world, okay, after our existence here in this world. Okay, so what constitutes the divine law? So the commandments of God that we find in Holy Scriptures constitute His divine law. Okay, Saint Thomas argues that divine law is necessary, important, because for one, human reason is partial and sometimes it can commit errors in its judgments. Okay, also human reason, or rather human laws, the laws that humans create, cannot account fully for certain immoral acts or bad actions. That's why there is divine law provided by God, okay, to account for those actions that that are unaccounted for by human laws. Next to divine law, we have the natural law. The natural law is man's participation in God's eternal law. So as explained earlier, we human beings, we somehow participate in God's eternal law in a rational way. God, when He created us, He gave us reason. And it is man's rational nature that directs him to seek the good and avoid evil through his actions. So through our rational nature, we are able to discern what is the good. And in fact, that's the first principle of our practical reason, that we always seek the good things. This reveals the existence of natural law in man. So natural law actually pertains to our innate or fixed inclination towards the good. And take note, this is a very Aristotelian idea or notion. In our discussion of virtue ethics, we said that Aristotle says all human actions are directed towards some good. Now, Saint Thomas Aquinas got this idea from Aristotle. So our reason, specifically the practical aspect of our reason, always seeks the good. And this natural inclination we have for the good is the natural law in us. Through this, we are able to participate in God's eternal law. Therefore, the first precept and the general precept of natural law commands us to seek the good and avoid evil. That's the fundamental precept or rule of natural law. So we will go into detail with natural law later. The last is human law. The human law is the public person's application of natural law to particular societies by way of conclusions and determinations. Okay, so human law exists when a public person, that is a person entrusted with the care for the community, exercises human reason in order to interpret the eternal law and create laws. So supposedly, men who are entrusted with the care for the community, like for example in our civil government, okay, in the civil government, the people who are given the duty to serve the community, supposedly they must create laws that are in accordance with the eternal law of God. So that these laws that they create is a kind of an interpretation of the eternal law of God. Okay? So no matter how imperfect the reason of man is, okay, man can make laws, but it is precisely that they must be mindful of the eternal law of God, that the laws they create must be in accordance with the good. Okay, that's human law. So these are the four types of laws. Again, eternal law, divine law, natural law, and human law. Now on natural law. Okay, when God created us, He gave us reason, right? God is an intelligent being, and if we look at the traditional biblical basis for this, it is said in scriptures that God created man in His image and likeness. So there is something in us that is an imprint of the divine. There is something in us that is similar to God's nature. And this is the presence of our intellect. We are intellectual beings, meaning to say we possess reason. So our reason has two aspects. The speculative part of our reason, which is the intellect and is directed towards the truth. We also have the practical part of reason, which is the will and is directed to the good. So speculative reason, the intellect, is what enables us to understand abstract mathematical principles, for example. Like when you say 1 plus 1 is equal to 2, are we able to understand that? It is through the speculative reason. But when we talk about practical matters, when it comes to doing things, it is the practical reason which is in operation. In other words, the will. And the will is always directed towards the good. The will always wants to attain the good. Now, in practical matters, the good is the object of practical reason. Man has the natural inclination toward the good, and this directs his actions accordingly. This is the natural law in man. Again, we are always inclined towards the good. We always seek the good. Practical reason tells us that. And our natural inclination to the good directs our actions accordingly. It tells us what to do. That for us to be able to attain this good, we must also do the proper things and avoid those bad things. This manifests the natural law in man. It means to say that there is something that governs in us, in our reason. Therefore, the fundamental precept of natural law says, good is to be done and pursued, and evil is to be avoided. That is what the natural law fundamentally tells us to do, that we must do good and avoid evil. Man's practical reason understands the precepts of natural law as human good. So the orders, the commands of natural law, our practical reason takes those things as human goods, as goods that we should and want to attain. Thus, the order of man's natural inclinations corresponds to the directives or precepts of natural law. So in the Summa Theologiae, St. Thomas asks a question. In fact, this is one of the title of the articles in his treatise on law. Whether the natural law contains several precepts or only one. What is a precept? Again, a precept is a rule, a norm. Does the natural law contain only one precept or several precepts? We know that natural law has a fundamental precept. Good is to be done, evil is to be avoided. Actually, this fundamental precept, okay, contains several precepts in it, or rather, these precepts are derived from that first precept. What are the precepts of natural law? They are the following. First, preserve one's life. So, as human beings, in fact, we have an animal nature. All animals share the instinct of self-preservation. Okay, no animal desires for what is harmful for himself. No animal desires what may be injurious to his own being. Okay, we humans, because we are animals, we also have this natural inclination for that is self-preservation. And because we see this as a natural good, therefore the corresponding rule of natural law, which tells us to preserve our life, is also good. Okay? Second one is to reproduce. Sexual reproduction is a good thing. Why? Because it allows us to preserve our species. Okay? So therefore, the natural law also tells us that we must biologically reproduce. And that is a human good. It preserves our species as humans. Thirdly, when we are able to reproduce, okay, we produce offsprings, our own children. It is also a human good to educate our offsprings or our children. Okay, so natural law also tells us that we must also educate our offspring. Now, these first three precepts, okay, we share them again with the rest of the animal kingdom. But there are precepts of natural law that are specifically coming from our nature as humans. Next, for example, is that we have this natural desire to know and worship God. Okay, so human beings have this natural desire to seek for a higher being or to some sort of a higher meaning in life. That's why we seek for God. Okay. Next is to live in society. That's why we consider it good to have friends. Okay, because we cannot live without being in a society. Next is that we must avoid ignorance. So seeking the truth is good. It is a precept of natural law. Lastly, we must avoid offending others. Having harmonious relationship with people in society is a human good. That's why we must avoid offending other people. So these are the precepts of natural law. I mean to say, these are the rules of natural law. This is what natural law compels us to do, commands us to do. Again, it is coming from reason itself, from our rational nature. So by means of introspection, by looking into our own nature as human beings, we are able to reflect, know this law which is in us. That way, we participate in God's eternal law. Okay, and natural law theory is a normative ethical theory precisely because it provides us with these precepts. that we ought to follow.